So, are you feeling better off after the autumn statement? Living standards are forecast to fall by a record amount over the next 2 years. Most of us are going to be paying more tax. But is it the medicine the UK needs? Could any other party do any better? Tonight, Question Time comes from Snape, a village in Suffolk, just a few miles from the coast, and on top of the cost of living crisis, this place is also at the centre of a passionate debate on energy, with several enormous nuclear onshore and offshore projects planned in the area. As ever, plenty to discuss, including should we be watching the World Cup from Sunday, even if we disagree with where it's being held. Welcome to Question Time. From the government, Victoria Atkins, who is Financial Secretary to the Treasury, was heavily involved in today's budget. In a previous life, before her election to the Commons in 2015, she was a barrister, specialising in serious organised crime. For Labour, we have Jonathan Ashworth, Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, once an advisor to Gordon Brown. He was elected as MP for Leicester South in 2011. He shadowed the health brief for a long time, including during the pandemic, and has been in his current role for a year. Ian Blackford leads the SNP's 44 MPs in the House of Commons. He's been MP for Ross, Skye and Lochaber in the country's northwest since 2015. Before that, he combined working as Treasurer for the party with a career in investment banking. He also runs a croft in Skye where he keeps sheep. Kate Andrews is economics editor at the right-leaning magazine The Spectator. This week, she's been writing about what she calls the mystery of the missing worker, saying the lack of people willing to work is a main constraint on UK growth. And Trevor Phillips has occupied numerous roles in public life. The youngest of 10 children, he's gone on to be a writer, broadcaster and a politician in the London Assembly. He's also chaired numerous institutions, such as the Commission for Racial Equality and now Green Park Recruitment. Last year, he was knighted for services to equality and human rights. To my panel, welcome to our audience here in beautiful Snape in Suffolk, and of course welcome to you at home. Do join in the conversation the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. Let's hear what you've got to say. And just a reminder that as well as being on BBC One, of course, after the 10 o'clock news, we are also live on iPlayer at 8 o'clock in case it's too late for you to stay up after 10 o'clock news. So let's get our first question tonight, which is from Richard Cook.
Can the British economy survive another 2 years of austerity?
What do you think, Richard?
I fear that it can't. Most of the Chancellor's measures seem designed to make things worse rather than better, and I fear the worst, really.
Victoria.
Well, this is a very sobering moment, I think, in our political discourse, but also with our economy, because we are facing pressures that none of us wanted to face and none of us predicted would happen. And I'm talking, of course, about the war in Ukraine, but also the hangover from the pandemic, where we and many other developed economies basically shut down our economy on a series of occasions in order to protect our wider well-being.
And also, presumably, the mini-budget. I mean, the Chancellor has said mistakes were made.
So, with the mini-budget, we know that, well, as Liz Truss herself has said, she went too far, too fast. But the independent OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, has said that by now the impact that had on markets has pretty much flushed through the system. But the international pressures that we're facing are being faced by economies around the world, which is why we're seeing that Germany, Italy and other countries have similar levels or higher levels of inflation than we do. And we know, for example, the United States have had to raise interest rates more quickly.
I mean, we are the only economy in the G7 to have a smaller economy than before the pandemic. The question is, can the British economy survive another 2 years of austerity? Richard says he fears it can't.
So this was what the autumn statement was about, trying to tackle both the international pressures but laying the foundations for the future. And the Chancellor focused on stability, because we need stability in the economy for businesses to thrive, for investors to come back and to invest in our country. But we also need to protect public services. And so I hope you heard today the investment that the Chancellor announced, particularly in the NHS, particularly in social care and in education. These are very, very big investment programmes that are going forward, despite the economic situation we're in. And then thirdly, helping businesses and the economy to thrive for the future. These are very, very big principles that we're standing this autumn statement on, and we have to do this because of the pressures that we face. But the number one thing that is causing us all difficulties is inflation. That's the killer, because with inflation, we have inflation because of what's happening in Ukraine with Putin, and with inflation, it hurts all of us with our wages, with our salaries, with our pensions. It makes our food bills more expensive. It makes our energy bills more expensive, which is why the package of measures that Jeremy announced today with the energy price guarantee, from which we will all benefit, but also targeting to support to the most vulnerable, that is really important. And we've tried to do this in a compassionate way.
John.
Richard, you're right to be fearful, and many of the people watching tonight will be watching with huge anxiety because we're facing recession. 500,000 people are facing losing their jobs. They're the official figures published today in the budget small print. And we're in this situation because of 12 years of poor economic performance under the Conservatives and a disastrous mini-budget of 2 months ago where we were given unfunded tax cuts, a spike in borrowing costs, a run on our pension funds and mortgage rates ricocheting around the money markets, leaving many homeowners facing increases in their mortgage payments this year. And the response of the Chancellor today was to load more and more tax on all of you in this audience and all of our viewers watching tonight. Millions more paying more in income tax. Millions more, in fact, millions more pensioners are likely, or many more pensioners are likely to pay more in income tax. Many pensioners who've worked hard to top up their state pension because of the freeze in the allowance. Many pensioners will be dragged into paying income tax for the first time. Motorists next March are going to see a 23% increase in fuel duty, 12 pence on a litre of petrol or diesel from next March. Working families are paying the price for the mess that I'm afraid the Conservatives have now made of the economy.
But would Labour not increase taxes for anyone?
Well, what I think is intolerable is that we've seen these tax increases on working people, on pensioners, on the motorists today, and yet many of what I believe are quite gross abuses in the tax system have gone unchecked. Why have we not got rid of the non-dom tax status? Why have we not gone further on the windfall tax and got rid of the loophole that means that firms like Shell don't have to pay tax? Why are we still keeping VAT on the fees of private schools? There were different decisions the Chancellor could have made today, but the Conservatives decided to tax working people and pensioners, and I don't think that's fair.
Okay. Man in the pink shirt at the back. Yes, you in the pink shirt.
I don't accept that the high inflation that we're experiencing at the moment is purely from Putin's war. Isn't it also coming from the extremely high profits made by big businesses since COVID? I think it's been reported...
Which do you have in mind?
Amazon, for example. I think it's been reported that some big businesses have experienced over 50% higher profits than pre-COVID. So isn't there a way to kind of lean on those people and those businesses to help people that are struggling?
So that's to get them to increase their share of the tax take?
Absolutely, yeah.
But what you're suggesting that causes inflation to rise as well, are you?
Yeah, because their profits are driven by us spending more money on their products or using their services. And where is their profit going? It's not coming back into the economy, is it?
The woman in the leather skin hat.
Kate, you say that the UK is facing the same international pressures as the rest of the world.
Do you mean Victoria?
Victoria, sorry, I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
But Brexit has decreased our trade with the EU by 16% and made Paris a bigger financial capital than London. When are we going to start talking about rejoining the single market?
Very quickly answer that, Victoria, before I move on, if you would.
So, as I say, Germany, Italy and other countries in Europe are facing higher inflation than we are. The United States...
And higher growth than we are.
Well, I'm not sure that's
well, we
correct.
are the only economy in the G7 to have a smaller economy than before the pandemic.
Yeah, and the reason we're having to take these steps now is because we absolutely need to address some of these international factors that we are seeing.
Well, what the lady there is saying is about Brexit.
But with Brexit, I mean, that, you know, that happened 6 years ago. The referendum result was 6 years ago. I think we've just got to look forward. We've left the EU. It was in accordance with the referendum. And as I say, the fact that other countries are facing these same pressures suggests that there are factors. And indeed, the OBR has set out that it's international headwinds that we are facing that are causing these problems, that are having impacts for us here at home.
Let me take another question. Yes, the man there in the blue sweater.
That's not good enough to say Brexit happened 6 years ago. The consequences are still living with us. And I can tell you that I am an exporter, and my business is still existing. I'm hanging on in there. I'm determined to trade with our closest and biggest market. I'm no interest in trading with Australia or New Zealand. Brexit is a factor, and the two main parties aren't talking about it, but we're talking about it, and BBC journalists are starting to question politicians about it, and it's about time we got this out in the open, because Brexit we had a vote. We had a marginal decision in favour of leaving, whatever that meant. It meant lots of different things to different people. But Brexit, it's a disaster. It's a disaster for our economy because if growth is not a new thing, we need to grow, we need to export, and we need to export to our biggest and most obvious market, which is just over 20 miles away across the Channel.
And can I ask what your business is? What your business is?
Yeah, I work for the NHS, but I'm a book wholesaler. I export exclusive to the EU.
Well, I tell you what, two of you mentioned Brexit now, so what I'm going to do is ask the rest of the panel to answer the initial question about austerity, and then let's come back to that. So I'm going to park it for a moment, but I am going to come back to it. Ian, can the British economy survive another 2 years of austerity?
We've got to remember that we've had austerity for 10 years after the financial crisis, and if we should have learned any lesson, that is that you can't cut your way to growth. We've had anemic growth over the course of that period. And of course, if you take cash out of the pocket of the poorest in particular, then hey presto, they don't have the money to spend. But, you know, when you look at the harsh reality of what has happened today, because I'm afraid that my worst fears have come home to roost, there's a 30 billion cut to public spending coming. The OBR book, and I'm delighted that we've got it now, we didn't get it in the mini-budget a few weeks ago, tells us that 19.4 billion is going to come out of public sector spending and 11.8 billion out of capital spending. That is a huge hit. But what you also see in the document, that real living standards are going to fall by as much as 7% over the course of the next 2 years. But, you know, I have to say to each and every one of you here and those watching this programme, it needn't be this way. The gentleman in the back talked about the excess profits that have been taken. You know, one of the things about this year, through companies not doing anything, simply because of the higher oil and gas prices, that we've seen a massive increase in the profitability of those engaged in that sector and others as well. And the extent of that is shown as what's happened with share buybacks. The value of share buybacks in the UK this year are £55 billion. What are they? They are a return of cash, of capital to shareholders. And it might surprise you that there's not a single penny in tax that is taken on these share buybacks. We said to the government that if you have a windfall tax and you include the likes of Amazon, you include the likes of share buybacks, then from that alone, you could raise £11 billion this year if you tax that at 25%. We could have taxed non-DOMs. That would have brought in another £3.5 billion. So the point about this is a political choice that the government has taken, because there was easy money that could have been accessed today by making sure that we're making the right choices in tax. But it's a political choice that it's the poorest in society that are going to have to pay that price. Now, when we talk about energy, and I'm delighted we've got an energy cap, but let's remember that that energy cap next year is £3,000. What does that mean? That means that your energy bills have gone up by 3 times from where they were 18 months ago. People are going to be facing desperate decisions as to whether they can turn their heating on, whether or not they can actually put food on the table. And we haven't addressed the issue that our energy prices are based on the wholesale gas price. Now, across the UK, gas is 40% of the market. In Scotland, it's actually only 14%. We're paying the price for the failures of energy policy of this government. And in fact, you are all paying the price of the failures of this government, and it needn't be happening.
Trevor.
The questioner asked about austerity. I think we just need to step back a little bit. This is not austerity as it was in 2010. Actually, they'll be spending a little bit more on public services than they are now. And at the end of the 5-year period, there will still be a £70 billion debt, £70 billion debt on the country. I think the first thing I'd want to say is, actually, we have not really yet seen how bad it's going to be. What we saw today, actually, or what we heard today, in my view, was the sound of the can being kicked down the road. We will actually, in 2 years' time, start to see what this really means in terms of cuts. They've done rather well in keeping expenditure where it is for the next couple of years, but it's very clear from what Jeremy Hunt said that when we get to the place where the increase in expenditure every year is just 1%, but inflation is still running much higher than that, that actually that's when we're going to see real cuts. And there are a number of things, speaking as, as chair of the business, that we haven't heard anything much about today. Nothing about what's going to happen to business rates, which is destroying our high streets and our small businesses, other than I think there's going to be a review. There is a review on the pension age, and who knows what that's going to end up with, that there will be people today who will never be able to stop working. There will be a series of other things, and we've been silent. Mr. Hunt said that we're going to cut energy demand by 15% by 2030. Not sure how that's going to happen. Presumably, we're all going to have to wear more jumpers and not turn on the heat. Nothing about social care and nothing about the central issue that affects most British enterprise and wealth creation, which is our woeful, just woeful, absent lack of productivity, which has been the case under every single government pretty much in my adult lifetime. So there's a lot down the road. And we haven't even started talking yet about the stock of debt and the fact that we are, frankly, in hot to the markets.
But Trevor, it's still a real terms cut now. And if I give you the example...
Yeah, I know, Ian.
If I give you the example of Scotland,
Ian,
our budget has been cut by...
Can I finish what I was going to say?
Yeah,
before you say what you're going to say?
But it's not an increase.
OK,
it's not an increase in real terms.
Well, the last point I was going to make, and the gentleman who raised Brexit, I think has an important point. Some of this is to do with trade, but what is hidden in the OBR's document today is an interesting assumption. And that assumption is that we are going to increase annual migration by about 60% compared to their estimates earlier this year. Yes. Now, I don't know how that's going to happen with the policy that Ms. Braverman's pursuing in the Home Office, but the OBR's predictions about inflation and productivity and GDP depend on us importing more people to do the jobs that aren't being done, because the biggest limitation, and I can tell you this, we have 200 clients in the corporate sector, the biggest limitation on British businesses' growth at the moment cannot get the people. Yeah. And unless we fix that, all of this is marginal.
So let's hear from our audience. The woman here in the front.
What I would like to ask is why, no matter who's in power, it doesn't matter who's in power, why don't you close the tax loopholes so that Amazon and all of these companies have to pay tax?
Which is what the gentleman at the back was going. And the woman next to you.
In this area particularly, I don't think pensioners are going to be able to survive another 2 years. I mean, the research...
Even with a 10.1% increase in pensions?
Well, if you're on a basic state pension, depending upon when you retired, you are getting half of the living wage. So if the living wage is $18,500 a year, and the most you're getting as a basic pension is £9,500 a year, how on earth are you meant to live? And in this area, there's no public transport. You need to drive everywhere. So I don't think pensioners in this area, and possibly other areas that I can't speak about, are likely to survive another 2 years.
The woman here.
My concern is the lack of growth. It is a total lack of growth in this financial statement. Now, yes, I agree that we are, shall we say, that the government is trying to pacify and to help the lower income group, the people on benefit, but there's no growth. There is no growth here. What about the people in the middle, the normal working people, the people that go out to work, the people with small businesses? Well, with less money in our pockets, we're not going to go into our little local shops that unfortunately have to charge more just to survive. We're not our local florists, our local little bakeries. They're all going to go, or they're going to have to lay off people. It's not surprising that the statement said that unemployment is going to rise by 2025, or was it 26, to 4.9 million. That was hidden, wasn't it?
Kate.
I want to address a few points that have been made and then come to the heart of your question. No, inflation is not being driven by business profits, even big ones. Inflation tends to be a monetary phenomenon, and we printed more money in the first year of COVID than we did in the decade leading up to COVID. That money went into the real economy, and we have had much demand facing far fewer goods and services. This has been very obvious with energy, right? We've had a real shortage. We've feared a real shortage, and those costs have skyrocketed, but it's true for goods and services too. The reason that we're not closing the loophole on the windfall tax, I think, is obvious, and it goes to this lady's point about growth. If we are ever going to dream of growth in this country, we need businesses to reinvest their profits into their business, into upskilling workers, into new, greener technology. We want to encourage business to do that. That's why that windfall tax loophole isn't being closed. And the reason we're not putting VAT on independent school fees is because a lot of parents would then send their kid to the state school, and it might actually end up costing more. These are very practical points. I want to get to the heart of your question, though, sir, and I very politely want to challenge it. You asked how we can survive another 2 years of austerity. The past few years have not been years of austerity. We have spent a record amount of money in peacetime. The furlough scheme cost £70 billion. We paid people quite generously to stay home. This year, we're running a budget deficit of roughly £177 billion. It's like 7% of all GDP. This would not be happening if we had been pursuing austerity. Today's autumn statement is a wake-up call that we cannot continue to spend as we have been doing. That includes pandemic spending, but it actually goes back to before the pandemic on things like pensions and things like the NHS. These are huge, expensive commitments that we've made. And Ian talked about easy money. Now, I know he meant it in a slightly different way. I'm going to reframe it. The era of easy money, of cheap borrowing, of we'll throw that on the debt is over. That is an international trend and has become very obvious, and that was made very clear in the mini budget. We cannot borrow like we used to. And if we are going to have these very generous promises, everyone is going to have to pay for it. And that's what this autumn statement was, a wake-up call. I think there are a few pitfalls in it. I think we have to stop putting vulnerable people into the same categories. A lot of people are very vulnerable, and they're going to be this winter, and they need a lot of support. But for some reason, we put millionaire pensioners into the same vulnerable category. And if you are a working person who doesn't fit into one of those categories, who really needs the money, or frankly really doesn't, you got rinsed in this autumn statement. There isn't a lot in there for you. And the last point I want to make about this is, and I think this is the biggest pitfall, or the biggest question for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. It is very obvious now that our commitments to pensions and the National Health Service are what is forcing taxes to go up. We have to pay for these things. And yet in this statement, we saw the state pension rise with inflation, 10.1%, and we saw billions more for the NHS. Now, perhaps you can't reform those things overnight, but as long as this is our plan, to keep funneling money into these very expensive systems, expect your taxes to go up. And if we think the tax burden's too high, highest, I think, since the post-war, then we need to talk about reform.
OK, I want to take 2 or 3 more points, and then I'm going to come back to this Brexit question. Yes, the young woman there. No, further forward. The young woman there.
Well, I'm a young person that's only seen, like, low growth and unemployment rising as it has. That's all I've ever seen. When am I going to have a future of economic longevity?
OK, and the man in the blue sweater at the back there.
On this issue of productivity, in 2019 there were 32.7 million people employed, and there are still 32.7 million people employed in this country this month. And one wonders what they are actually all doing if we have all these vacancies and all these nurses and carers and heavy goods vehicle drivers absent that we used to have in 2019. Where have they gone?
OK, and the man in the blue sweater behind you, yeah.
So just a couple of points on inflation. I think Trevor and Kate touched upon these. So obviously with the pandemic and the shutdown of the global economies, was it not inevitable that we would face inflation like this because there was always going to be a catch-up after that 2-year period of no growth? And then secondly, in the UK, do we then face, effectively, we don't have as many tools to control that now because of Brexit, because of the supply shortages on the Labour side. So we're in a disadvantaged position compared to the other G7 countries.
Right, so let's deal with this Brexit question. There's a limit to quite how long I'll spend it, only because I need to get some other questions as well. But, Victoria, sorry, what was your name, sir? You were talking about your business that you were struggling to trade with other EU countries.
My name's Philip Goff.
So, Philip, would you want to answer Philip, Victoria? So he says, all very well talking about Brexit 6 years ago. He is feeling the effects now and is having a damaging effect on his business.
Well, it ill behoves anyone sitting on a panel to presume to tell a business person how to run their business. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to say is, look, we took the decision 6 years ago to leave. We delivered that in January 2020. A month later, we then had the pandemic hit us. And hit us it did, if you remember. Who could have foreseen that we would have told children to leave their schools, we would have shut our high streets
yes, but Victoria,
down.
Rich, that's not what you're talking about, Philip, is it? Philip is... No, but hang on a second, because we can get into the pandemic and the effects. But you are saying, forgive me if I'm repeating you wrongly here, very specifically, when it comes to trading with EU countries, you are struggling to do that. Is that right?
It's more difficult. My business is relatively simple. You know, I export books. I import books. I import them more easily from the United States than I do from the EU now. Before Brexit, trading within a single market could not have been easier. There was no paperwork, no red tape, the irony of it. And now there's lots of red tape, there's lots of bureaucracy, there are lots of delays, there are extra costs, and some customers are reluctant to trade with a country outside the EU.
Well, let's let Victoria answer. So how are you going to help?
The reason I talk about the pandemic is because we had the pandemic hit us about a month after we formally left. We have then had 2 years of that, and there have been hangovers from the pandemic. For example, massive supply chain issues around the world. And so I guess what I'm saying is we have this, then we've had the war in Ukraine. We haven't really had time since we left the EU to be able, I think, to give an objective assessment of the impact of Brexit on our economy. But I do keep using these international comparators because actually we do need to look at what's happening in Germany, which is in the EU, in the Netherlands, which is in the EU.
He's just saying he wants you to make it easy for him to trade. That's all he's asking.
You know, we struck a deal with the EU, and we are doing our level best. I'm looking at what we can do to make borders much, much easier. We want it to be as frictionless as possible, and we're now seeing, I hope, now that we're getting back round the table again with President Macron and others after the pandemic, I'm very much hoping that we will begin to see some of the improvements that you're asking for. But we cannot, we must not somehow, set Brexit up as being unrelated to everything else that's happened in the world since then. It is a decision we took 6 years ago. We've now got to look to the future and get on with it.
Could Labour make it any better?
Well, I have to be honest with you, sir, because it's important that those politicians are honest. The Labour Party, I know, it's a curious thing to say, isn't it, these times? The Labour Party isn't going to reverse Brexit. We accept the result, but we do believe that, yes, that the trading arrangements that we've got with our brothers and sisters in Europe, we do need to improve that. We need frictionless trade, and it's quite obvious that the easiest, the oven-ready deal, the easiest deal in history and all that kind of stuff was guff, it was spin. It doesn't turn out to be true. So, yes, we want to help exporters. On this point...
The point that we're hearing from that neither of the parties are talking about Brexit.
Well, I mean, we have been talking about Brexit and how we want to improve our trade deals. But can I just make this point about tools and how we deal with inflation? Because it links also to your point. One of the ways in which you do deal with inflation is that you increase your labour supply. And at the moment, part of the problem that we have in the United Kingdom, and I've not seen your data set, sir, but our overall employment rates are lower than they were pre-pandemic. We're sort of out of kilter with other G7 countries. We have in the latest data. But the numbers leaving work for sickness, 2.5 million, at a record level. And today the government admits, in this book, in the small print, that the increase in sickness is costing us 7.5 billion extra a year, and it says that's going to be permanent. So we need a plan to fix the NHS, because many of these people are on a waiting list, either for mental health conditions or a hip operation or a hernia, and they can't go back to work.
I can't wait to hear Labour's plan.
So we need to fix the NHS first, so we can treat people, but we also need to give people proper support so they can return to work. And yet the government has underspent by £2 billion on its own employment support scheme. So we want to get people back to work. We shouldn't be leaving people on the scrap heap at all.
Ian, so just very reasonably brief, if you would, because I need to move on. On the question of Brexit, I think, obviously, I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say. Just with the SNP's view about that.
Yeah, well, our position was very different, and I feel for Philip and everybody else caught up in this, because we certainly did not want to leave the EU, and Scotland voted to stay in. But we did warn the UK government right through the Brexit talks that there was a compromise position, and that was staying in the single market and the customs union, and that would have addressed your challenges, Philip. But, you know, there's been lots of talk about what's being honest, and again, all the economic analysis done at the time, and it's been proven to be correct, is that leaving the European Union, the Brexit deal that was on the table, was going to hit our economy by 4%. And if it wasn't for Brexit, then we wouldn't have needed the austerity that we've now got coming down the lines.
What?
But when you look at what's happened, one second, please. If we look at what's happened since the pandemic, 1.3 million EU citizens have gone back home. They've been lost to the economy. That's the impact on the labour market. Let me give you the very real example of a bakery in my own constituency in Fort William, Nevis Bakery. They told me just the other week that they could double tomorrow. 60% of their staff used to be European-trained qualified bakers. They now can't recruit them. That's the missing growth opportunity. That's what Brexit has done to us.
Kate, you take a very different view. Very quickly, someone can move on. I'll give you 20 seconds.
I have no doubt that Brexit is playing a role in this, but if we look at the autumn statement today, this is a fraction of what that was addressing. Look at inflation across the Eurozone. It's less than a percentage point under the UK. The European countries are having a very difficult time too. The frustration should be with politicians who have not made the most opportunity of Brexit. Frustration should be with the UK and the EU for not coming together and appreciating mutual recognition when it comes to trade. Sir, I absolutely take your point. There is still huge opportunity here. But the idea that what we're doing now is because of Brexit and not COVID, Anne, I mean, that's for the birds.
Okay. No, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop it. This is a discussion we could have for the whole hour, and I expect it merits it. But I'm going to reflect what you wanted to ask, which is lots of other questions as well. Before I do, I just want to tell you that next week we'll be in the town of Skipton in North Yorkshire, and the week after that we're off to Aberystwyth on the west coast of Wales. So if you'd like to be in the audience of either of those programmes, go to our website, bbc.co.uk/question-time, and have a look. And the list of all the places we're going to be are there, so have a look and see if we're coming to your area soon and be part of our audience. OK, a lot of you asked about this next thing. I mean, we choose our questions based on where your interests lie. Most of you asked about the statement today, but this was the next thing on the list. So Martin Paulson, off you go.
In a village not too far from here, there are posters in front gardens saying "Stop Sizewell C", alongside posters protesting at the prospect of a local solar panel farm. To what extent will NIMBYism impede our progress to achieving net zero?
So, Martin, I'm assuming from the way you phrase that question that you are in favour of Sizewell C, which the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt today gave the green light to, and it's just, I think it's about 10 miles from here on the coast, the idea of this new large nuclear reactor.
Well, I guess I'm undecided, but I think the struggle is to come to an informed opinion. There's just too much data conflicting by various pressure groups or whatever to come to an informed decision. But it's more a point of, as a country, we seem to struggle coming to some consensus, making a decision and acting on a decision to achieve an outcome. We've recognised we need electricity in the future. We want to be secure, energy safe. But where's it going to come from?
Where's it going to come from? Certainly you cannot drive around here without seeing posters protesting against Sizewell C. John?
Well, I hope NIMBYism doesn't prevent the transition to a green energy future that we need to do. I think,
do you agree with the plan now for Sizewell C?
Yeah, I mean, nuclear has to be part of the mix. We want to see investment in onshore wind as well. I don't understand why the Conservatives continue to rule that out. I'm not quite sure where the Conservatives are at the moment about solar panels in farmers' fields. I know under Liz Truss they were against that. I don't know if that's back on the agenda or not under the Conservatives, but we should be investing in solar and, of course, offshore wind, not only because of the important obligations to transition to net zero, which you highlighted in your question, but also by doing this, if we can invest in our own energy infrastructure, we bring jobs back to communities, we bring good jobs back to communities, so it's good for wages, we lower people's bills, and of course we've now seen quite vividly, haven't we, what happens when we are completely dependent on very volatile international energy markets when something happens like we've seen in Russia and Ukraine. So it's good for international security as well, which is why we've said we would invest in things like something called GB Energy. That would be our own state-owned energy company. Yeah, we're in favour of nuclear has to be part of the mix. Onshore wind, solar, offshore wind, renewables. It's good for jobs. It's good for your bills. It'll bring bills down. It's good for climate change, and it's good for international security reasons. What's not to like about it?
Okay, Ian.
Well, I've actually just published over the last few weeks a green energy report for Scotland, but it'll help you here as well, because what I argued in that report is that between now and 2050, we could increase fivefold our green energy output in Scotland. We could go from 12 gigawatts where we currently are to 80 gigawatts, actually produce about 4 times as much energy that we need. So we could assist the demand for green energy here throughout the rest of the United Kingdom as well. You know, in doing that, and you talk about growth, you talk about jobs, what we've argued in this report is that in Scotland alone, we would create 385,000 jobs by 2050, dwarfing...
But when it comes to nuclear power...
I'm going to address that. Dwarfing what we currently have in oil and gas. Now, a key element of that is tidal. And if we develop tidal, based on what's contained in a Royal Society report last October, just before COP26, we could get to 15% of the UK's electricity production from tidal. Vastly cheaper.
Just around the Scottish coast?
No, around the UK coast. It's a UK...
Okay, but coming to the main question, which is about Sizewell C, do you support that?
No, because that's what I'm trying to explain. That we need base load, but you can get the base load from tidal. And the key thing is, if we look at the developments that have taken place already...
Is that technology ready for that?
Yes, it is. So if you look at 70% of the supply chain and the projects which are there today, the technology comes from Scotland, 80% comes from the UK. The UK government, I'm glad to say, has partly come along with us, because we've got a 20 million...
But Ian, if the technology is ready for tidal, why have you not done it?
Because Maygen 2 is just in the process of being green-lit. But what I'm explaining to you, look at the Royal Society report. The evidence is there. We don't need nuclear because you can get the base load from tidal. And if I can assist those that are objecting to Sizewell here, then I'd be delighted to do so. It's expensive. It is a white elephant. We can produce safe green energy. We don't need nuclear.
I'll hear from the woman here, first of all. Yes, in the glasses.
When we're talking about bringing jobs back to Great Britain, back to the industry, the government really needs to sort what their plan is for the next 10, 15 years, for the future of our children. We need schools to invest in technology, STEM subjects.
And what about the nuclear reactor, which is sort of what we're talking about right now?
Where are these qualified people going to come from? Are they going to come from Great Britain, Wales, Scotland? No, they're going to come from abroad. They're going to take their money and spend it back abroad. It's about time we need to invest in industries in this country.
And do you support the idea of Sizewell C?
I do support Sizewell C, but I want to see our children invested in so they can take the industry and take themselves abroad and bring the money back to this country for a change.
And the man next to you, you agree with that?
I agree that Sizewell C is definitely needed. In fact, we need more because we've got to become self-sufficient in energy. The war in Ukraine has proved that.
Okay.
Sizewell C should have been started and already been underway because we desperately need the extra electricity generation. And NIMBYism is, what the gentleman said about NIMBYism is quite right. It costs millions and millions of pounds in inquiries and delays and everything else. And if you're going to start looking at better electricity generation for the future, nuclear has got to be the way to go. I totally agree with some of what Ian said, Mr. Blackford. We are so far behind Europe in onshore wind generation and schemes like that, mainly because of NIMBYism. We need to start looking at how we can do this in a much greener way, which works. And wind farms, not necessarily solar farms, but nuclear and wind, definitely.
All right, let's hear from the man in front of you here.
Twofold. One, the French announced, I think, this week that they are going to compulsorily make all car parks over 40 spaces have solar panels as a shelter. And by doing this to every car park that matches that description, they will recreate the power from 10 individual nuclear reactors. 10, not just one. At a cost, a fraction of the billions that, excuse me, that Sizewell C is alleged to cost.
So am I to assume from this that you're against the building of Sizewell C here?
Well, I'm against the nonsense that involves a bankrupt company using our money to build something that is out of date, doesn't work anywhere else, and is going to be finished beyond my lifetime and probably never be.
It's the man there in the beige jacket.
I think the term NIMBYism is extremely offensive to people who object, and I'd rather people didn't use it, because people who are objecting for very valid reasons, and they should be listened to. So far, nobody has mentioned the problem of waste, of toxic waste, and that is a big concern because we do not know how it's going to be dealt with in the future, and I don't believe that we have the right to leave the legacy of nuclear waste, toxic nuclear waste, for future generations. I actually think it's a crime.
So, Trevor, we're talking about Sizewell C, which is a big issue here, but obviously nuclear is an issue for the entire country.
Yeah.
And these debates will be... I mean, Boris Johnson talked about building a new nuclear reactor, one every year for 10 years.
Yeah,
this is going to play out across the United
Ian
Kingdom.
made me slightly nervous because, you know, you're rightly talking about having our own domestic, reliable sources of energy. But frankly, if you get your way, the energy in Scotland won't be domestic, will it? It'll be a different country. So I'm a bit worried about your desire to...
You're our dearest friends, and we will supply you with green energy.
Yeah,
you don't need to worry about that.
That's what the mafia always says. I started life as an industrial chemist, and I worked in an oil refinery down on the Thames estuary. It was ugly, it was hot, and nobody particularly liked it, but we had to have it. The nuclear industry, or nuclear reactors, are going to be part of the mix that takes us anywhere near. I don't, by the way, think we're going to get to net zero by 2050, but I think it's worth trying. If we're going to get anywhere near it, nuclear has to be a big part of the mix. And, you know, I know this is not going to make me popular here. These stations have to be somewhere. And the range of places they can be is actually quite narrow. When I was actually in that business, my mentor, the man called Brian Flowers, was a great nuclear physicist. He did the first big report back in the 1970s about nuclear energy, and he laid down two principles. First of all, whatever it is we build has to be safe. And I think your point would have been right, though I don't think it's quite right now. I think they've developed the technology so that it is safe. And secondly, and this is the thing that's tricky, it has to have public support. And it clearly doesn't quite have public support here. I think there's more talking to be done. The last thing, the other thing which I would say, though, is that as ever in this country, we are making a decision that is applicable to 10 years ago. This was an issue, the technology here was 10 years old. We should now be talking about small modular nuclear reactors, which could be built faster, come on stream more quickly, are, we think, probably going to be more reliable contributors to the grid. Now, frankly, it's going to take us another 10 years to get to the stage where we realise that. And I have to say that because of the situation that we face across the world, I don't see any option but getting on with Sizewell C. We can't have another 5 years waiting.
Kate. What about this idea of Sizewell C is rather sort of obsolete now?
Well,
we should be going to a different type of technology.
I think that's right. I think we have to separate Sizewell C as a project from the desperate need to build more energy infrastructure.
And it is the one that has been greenlit.
It is the one that has been greenlit, and it's estimated to cost up to 3 times more than the government originally projected. It looks like a lot of the technology is going to be offline, and it's not going to come online for the better part of 15 years. But I think skepticism of Sizewell C...
So do you think it should go ahead?
Well, look, I think skepticism of it, and I am quite skeptical of it, should be separated from the desperate need to build more energy infrastructure in this country. All different kinds of renewables, nuclear included. I completely agree with John that this is an issue of national security as well as climate change. Our energy bills that we were talking about before, you know, we need to prepare for the future. We need to be reliant on this. But a country that is not building is a country that is declining. And I'm sorry, sir, that you think NIMBYism is an offensive word, but I think it's crucial that we use it. Those who are saying not in my backyard are rejecting progress. And this young lady in the second row said, where's the growth going to come from? You know, where's my generation going to see those opportunities? There's another question for your generation too. Where are the houses going? Okay. You know, if you're under 40 and you're renting in cities like London, lots of cities, you could be paying up to half of your salary in rent. We need to build homes. We need to build energy infrastructure. This is where we get productivity and progress.
Let's hear from a couple of people. They've got hands there at the back. And Hardy said yes. The woman at the far end, and then I'll come to the one next to you. Yes.
We're not rejecting progress, we're rejecting a bad project. This type of reactor has never been built on time or budget anywhere in the world. There's only 2 working examples. One of those was offline for 12 months in China because of fuel failure early in its operational life. I mean, we could be investing £30 billion, waiting 15 years, and the thing never works.
All right,
and in the meantime, a tax would go on all our energy bills. We'd be paying for it before a single light bulb was lit.
So Victoria, why is the government going for something like Sizewell C and not for these smaller modular reactors?
Because we've done the analysis, and this, we believe, is the right project to deliver this diversity of resources, which I think we all agree on, that we need a range of energy sources. You know, not just tidal, though Ian makes it sound very attractive, wind farms. We actually, Jonathan, I don't think has been quite fair. We have a huge number of offshore wind farms that we have constructed on the East Coast. I know, I'm a Lincolnshire MP.
He was talking about onshore.
Onshore. Yeah, no,
onshore wind.
But offshore...
Yes, he wasn't talking about it. He was saying, why aren't you committed to onshore wind?
That's great, offshore. What about onshore?
Jonathan, who is in the middle of the country and so is not near the coastline, anyone who knows about offshore wind will tell you that these turbines are huge, much, much bigger and much more efficient, much more productive than turbines that we can put on land. These things are vast. They're hidden out at sea. They bring their energy on land on my constituency, and it goes across the country. So there's a huge range of resources that we need to use. Nuclear must be part of it. We have done the analysis. We believe Sizewell C to be an opportunity to help with this. But energy independence, as the gentleman there said, it's absolutely critical. The Ukraine has shown that to us. The lady at the front who asked about children and how we can train our children up, one of the announcements we made today in the autumn statement was about what we want to do with investment zones, looking at encouraging investment in 5 growth industries, including very technically complex industries that we think we can do really, really well in. And part of that is also the extra investment in education for our schools, precisely for the reasons that you've said, because our children are our future and we need to educate them in these resources, in these
I'm going to squeeze in one more question. I know loads of you got your hands up, forgive me, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question, which is from Nisha. Nisha Moodley, where are you? There you go.
Should I secretly watch the World Cup, even though I don't agree where it's been held?
Great question.
And are you going to be?
If the home countries do well, I fear my willpower will.
Right. There's been a lot of controversy, Trevor, clearly, about the World Cup, which is about to get underway on Sunday in Qatar.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. You know, a country where the average temperature is over 40 degrees, there were no stadiums, it's not got a big tradition of football. It's the obvious place to hold the World Cup, isn't it? That was a decision that was just mad, should never have been taken. But of course, we know why it was taken. Money, 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 and more money. I think there are two things you could say about this. One is, I think that those football stars who never tire of telling us about their attachment to human rights and the better world and all of that malarkey, clearly, you know, I suppose if somebody gave me £150 million, there are a lot of things I would do, but I don't think I'd trash my entire reputation for it. I think they could do something to solve this. I think that you should watch it. I think you should cheer for our country. And I think what you should also do is hope that when Harry Kane speaks in the after-match, whether we win or lose, interview on Monday, where we're playing Iran, I really hope that Harry Kane will have something to say to support the women of Iran who are conducting the most heroic struggle in the world.
What should we expect? I mean, is it fair, A, to expect people who don't agree with the World Cup being held in Qatar to not watch? Because as you're saying, Nisha, if we do well, you probably will watch. And is it fair to load it on people like Harry Kane to start making geopolitical statements?
Well,
or should we expect that?
Well, all the footballers who, frankly, have been taking the knee for 2 years, frankly, they're not shy of making a statement when it's easy. Now's the time to show us that it matters.
Victoria?
The United Kingdom government is not responsible for the decisions of FIFA, but
they are going to the World Cup in the form of foreign secretary.
The foreign secretary is. I mean, look, crikey, if any of our home teams do well, then of course we would want to cheer them on. I'm not going to tell people to watch or not watch football. Goodness me, I think that's stepping over the mark for a minister. But what I really think is important is that our footballers and others keep talking about these issues. And I'm going to be very proud of our players when they're wearing their armbands as they play as well, showing the rainbow colours.
Well, it's not quite the rainbow colours.
Well,
it's a version of the rainbow colours,
yeah.
but not quite. Yes, young man there.
Who's Ian going to be supporting for the World Cup?
Well, look, can I say firstly, I agree with everything that Trevor said. It's an absolute disgrace that the World Cup is taken in Qatar. All the people that have lost their lives in the building of the stadium. And what an opportunity to stand up for women in Iran, and I hope we do that. Look, I love football, and
So who are you going to be supporting in? Come on.
I grieve that
Put your money where your mouth is.
There. I love football, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the teams and all the games. But what I will do, of course, I recognise...
Are we to assume definitely not England?
No. What I'm going to say is that I absolutely applaud that England and Wales are appearing in those finals. I wish both teams all the best. I hope we have a fantastic tournament.
Can I ask, does that answer your question?
Everyone enjoys what we're
Does that answer your question?
I think it was the answer I was expecting to.
All right, okay.
I will say to you, I've got one player from my own team, Hibernian, Martin Boyle, that's playing for Australia, and of course I've got a soft spot for him. Of course I hope England does very well in the tournament.
The woman at the very back in the red top, with the glasses. Yeah.
Yes, it's about Sizewell again, because I feel that it's so important that it is stopped because it's antiquated technology. And the plants that EDF have built in France, more of their plants than they've built are offline because they're corroding. Yeah. And over here we have not water for Sizewell C. Okay. There is no water.
All right, I hear you. I've moved on to another subject. If you'll give me, I'll stay on this topic. Kate?
I think that...
Should we be watching the World Cup? That's the question she's asking.
Look, I'm not going to judge anybody who does because I'm going to be doing it. I agree with everybody's points that it's a real shame FIFA has put us in this spot.
So is it fair then? I mean, I'm just asking the question, not making a point myself. Is it fair then to expect people like Harry Kane or whoever it might be to make statements, but at the same time sit at home and happily just...
You know what? I usually prefer when celebrities, whether they be media stars or sports stars, stick to topics that they really know about. I think often their political statements can get out of hand. I think Trevor's made really good points on that if you are going to stand up for certain human rights, you probably shouldn't be selective because people will start to ask questions as to why you're being selective. But look, broadly speaking, we've been put in a horrible situation. I think we should all try to enjoy the World Cup, but know very well that when we do use the hashtag, when we do turn it on, there's an element of being complicit which makes us all uncomfortable. And very quickly, if I may, I think the Sizewell point and the Qatar point go hand in hand. If we don't want to be in a position where we want any money from these kinds of regimes...
Because also we buy a lot of liquefied natural gas.
We need to be energy independent, whether it's Sizewell or, I think far better technology, we need to be energy independent to the best of our ability.
Woman there in the glasses and the black top.
Hi, I'll definitely be watching on Monday and I'll be supporting England. But I do believe that people should be watching the World Cup. We should be supporting our domestic teams. Yeah. But I think a huge responsibility now should be on the media. We have a writer on the panel, obviously. But the media should be reporting the stories about Iran, about the women's struggles there, because they didn't report on the problems with FIFA at the start when the World Cup was rewarded to Russia and Qatar in one big sweep, when it should never have been done. We all knew there was corruption involved. It was quite obvious. Like you say, there's no infrastructure for football in Qatar. So the media do have a huge responsibility, I feel, just as much as the footballers, to make a statement over the next 4 weeks and report on the problems.
And the man at the back in the cap, baseball cap.
I will be watching. It will probably be with a slight bitter taste in my mouth, but I have to say it does feel like a complete PR own goal, both for Qatar, for FIFA, and also for the celebrities that are endorsing it. I can't help but feel that the likes of Robbie Williams and David Beckham, the vast amounts of money they're taking on behalf of this, must have a bad taste in their mouth too.
Can I just ask, are there any footy fans who, in this audience, who are going to choose not to watch? Right, OK. I've only got my minute there. I need to get to you, John. But let's just hear from you, the man in the middle.
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of people saying, I feel really bad about it. It's really awful, but I'm gonna watch it. We're just ignoring it by doing that. I don't think you can have both of those options. Right. I think if you are endorsing the World Cup, if you're watching it, you're allowing these companies and all these businesses to make money off it and profiting in the way they do, billions and billions and billions of dollars. And you can't just ignore it. You have to accept that you have a choice to make here.
So you're
it's either you watch it and you support it, or you don't support it and you don't watch it. It's simple as that.
I mean, I share the same sentiment of my colleagues here on the panel. I feel deeply, deeply uncomfortable, unhappy. I think it's a disgrace that Qatar are hosting it. I actually went to Qatar.
So when Qatar say, I mean, just to put the other point, they say, well, look, irrespective of the controversy of how they may have got it, we are broadening the remit of football, we're taking it to a different part of the world. I mean, look, I'm not saying this is my view, but this is clearly the point they make.
Look, I actually went there about 6 or 7 years ago to look at some of the early construction of the stadiums as part of a parliamentary delegation. It was clear that there was all kinds of abuses going on. We tried to get them to work with international trade unions on some of the issues. We didn't make we didn't really make any progress, frankly. Of course, they've got an appalling record on LGBT rights as well. I mean, I absolutely think it's a disgrace that they've got the World Cup. But, people will want to support England, and I'm just disappointed that Ian didn't break out into a rendition of It's Coming Home. It's Coming Home. I would have loved to have seen that.
Well, still time. Our time is up, but who knows?
That as a panel.
I was going to say, our time is up, but who knows? He may be doing that when we're off air. We'll find out, and I shall report back next week. Thank you very much to the panel. And thank you very much to you, of course, here in St Maltings for coming along this evening, and thank you very much to you at home for watching. Until next time from Question Time, bye-bye.